What does recent hockey history say about teams who are outside of the playoff picture? We'll discuss that more on today's Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Thursday, February 26th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the nation's #1 sports podcasting network, and it is your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. So, Panther fans, grateful to be back here once again on another edition of the show to discuss everything in the world of the Florida Panthers. Today, we are going to discuss what the 2010 and 2014 Olympics have looked like for teams who are outside of the playoff race in their attempt to make the dance. We're also going to discuss who has the most to prove coming out of the Olympic break for Florida, and also do the Panthers have a scheduling disadvantage, coming out of the Olympic break with a back-to-back starting on Thursday and Friday for them as they are back in action tonight against the Toronto Maple Leafs. But just wanted to do a little bit of an experiment and a little bit of a research project myself on just how teams who have been on the outside looking in at the Olympic break, both in 2010 and in 2014, which are also two of the most recent hockey tournaments as far as the Olympics that I've consumed. I was not a hockey fan in the 2006 Olympics and prior to that, so I'm just doing from the best of my memory as well as a little bit of research to refresh a little bit there. But for a little bit of context here for both the 2010 and 2014 Olympics, because both Olympic breaks happened at different points of the season. In the 2010 Olympics, there were 60 to 63 games that teams had played through right before the break. And then the gold medal game happened on February 28th between USA and Canada. And then the trade deadline was less than a week later. And also the divisions were different, as the three division winners were in the playoffs. And then it was from the rest in order there from 4 to 8. So that's what we talk about and the players talk about when they miss the whole the old playoff format of 1 versus 8 instead of the division rivalries there, which, by the way, I saw a funny tweet the other day saying that if this were the NHL running this tournament, they would have had Canada versus USA in the quarterfinals because rivalries. So that was a little bit of a funny tweet there. But the playoff format had changed before the 2014, during the year of the 2014 Olympics, which the Olympic break came at February 8th. Gold medal game was on February 23rd between Canada and Sweden. NHL resumed on the 25th, was supposed to resume on the 26th, actually, but there was actually a rescheduled game between Carolina and Buffalo that was actually played the day before due to a blizzard that happened in the region. And then the trade deadline, just like how we are doing this year, is a week later. So that is a little bit more of a runway to at least create a little bit of a push, versus in 2010, you knew kind of more of who you are. I mean, you kind of know who the Florida Panthers are at this point in the season, based on the 57 games that they played, but 2014 has a better indication of how many games have played, and also relating that to the trade deadline with 58 to 60 around there of the average. And for both 2010 and 2014, and looking right now in 2026 with the Florida Panthers being outside of the mix, excuse me, in the playoffs, it hasn't been favorable for teams who are way on the outside looking in when it comes to making that run. I mean, crazy to think in 2010 and 2014, each of those respective Olympics for the Panthers, they've only sent 2 guys. In 2010, it was Tomas Vokoun and Dennis Seidenberg, respectively, for Czech Republic and Germany. And then in 2014, it was Alexander Barkov and for Finland and Tomas Kopecky for Slovakia. for those tournaments. So again, this was during the dead period of the Florida Panthers life cycle. 2014 was during the ownership change as well, and the Panthers were in that range of getting top 5 picks. I mean, in 2010 alone, they had 3 first-round picks after trading Nathan Horton to the Boston Bruins and having 3 first-round picks in that 2010 draft, where they took Eric Branson, Nick Bjugstad, Quinton Howden, and then following up with Jonathan Huberdeau, Alexander Barkov, Aaron Ekblad in those years after that. So that was kind of where the Panthers were heading when they originally signed Dale Talon away from Chicago to become their general manager, and then eventually president of hockey ops, and then back to general manager as well. But I also looked at records for teams of where they were pre-Olympic break, and if they were in a playoff spot in before the Olympic break and then post-Olympic break as well, and who had the better records there. So in 2010, the team who actually had the biggest swing in pre-Olympic break versus the post-Olympic break in 2010 were actually the Detroit Red Wings there. So, and 1 point behind, but their pre-Olympic break points percentage was at a .557 there. And doing that with 7 guys who made the Olympics and 2 guys who were hurt during those same Olympics, and 1 who didn't play a single game. So Henrik Zetterberg for Sweden, he was still on the roster with a knee injury, but did not play a single game during that tournament. Was not out of the roster, but was more of a cheerleader and a healthy scratch then. So there's a little bit of context there. Pavel Datsyuk, an ankle injury during the tournament, played but was hampered, ended up playing 12 playoff games. Henrik Zetterberg also played 12 playoff games right before they lost in the second round to the San Jose Sharks. So other key injuries there during the tournament. Mike Richards for the Philadelphia Flyers, foot and ankle injury, only missed a few preliminary round games. Brent Seabrook for the Chicago Blackhawks, ankle injury, but played through it, still played the 22 playoff games right before the Chicago Blackhawks ended up hoisting the Stanley Cup that year, in the year that Patrick Kane scored that goal, which nobody knew that it went in. Kind of like what we saw this year with Jack Hughes' goal. I would question whether that puck did go in. So it was like a little bit of a deja vu moment there, at least for yours truly. I'm sure a lot of you guys felt that way yourselves. And also one that messed with the goalie rotation for the Florida Panthers, Thomas Vokoun was dealing with the groin injury that year for the Panthers, as he was one of the 2 representatives. So although he played 5 games, it really messed with that. But going back to Detroit and the fact that they were at a 557 points percentage and ended up being an 810, they ended up being from outside the playoffs to the 5th seed, but only 1 point out. So the Calgary Flames ended up that team that was the team that was out. So the rest of the conference, in the Eastern Conference, because remember, Detroit and Columbus were still in the West, so they were fighting in a different conference and it wasn't that whole 3 spots in the top of the division, because we're seeing right now with Sidney Crosby being hurt that even if they falter a little bit, the 2 wildcard spots in the Atlantic are 2 Metropolitan Division teams. So Columbus, which is right now in the East, will have to make up 5 points, along with Pittsburgh losing a whole bunch of points as well. So it's a little bit of a different situation based on 2026 compared to 2010. So that is the biggest difference there. So everywhere else, the whole Eastern Conference, everyone who was in the playoff spot at the Olympic break was still in a playoff spot at the end. And a lot of these are teams that also brought a lot of guys to the Olympics as well. The Devils had 5 guys participate in the Olympics. Penguins also had 5. Senators also had 5. The Philadelphia Flyers had 4. And on the West, we talked about the Red Wings. They had 7 guys in it. The Anaheim Ducks, they had 8. So a lot of guys, just like how the Panthers had in 4 Nations, they were able to still manage injuries like we saw with Tkachuk last year and still find a way through. But obviously, none of these teams there were in the situation of the Panthers of 3 straight runs to the final and trying to make it for a 4th time to try to three-peat. But 2014, like we said, a different playoff format for the for the NHL there. And the only difference for in 2014, as far as playoff teams, all the teams in the West who were in the playoffs were also in the playoffs at the end of the season. The only real change was a team that was 1 point out. So the 2010 and 2014, 1 point out. It wasn't where the Panthers are as far as 8 points out. So it goes to show you how much of an actual hill it is to climb for Florida here. Although for 2014 is more reflective on what we're seeing in 2026, Columbus was only 1 point out. It's funny because the Toronto Maple Leafs were 7 points ahead of the final cut line and then ended up at the end of that season 9 points out. And here's the thing. Toronto in that year of the Olympics in 2014, they only sent 3 NHLers to the Olympics. That one was also including one of them being Phil Kessel for Team USA, where that year the USA did not medal. Even though they did bring a really great moment with TJ Sochi against Russia, Sergei Bobrovsky being in net there. But some of the teams who have brought 10 guys, and the Chicago Blackhawks who already won a cup, St. Louis Blues, one of them being TJ Oshie, Jay Bouwmeester there. Montreal brought 7 guys as well. Detroit, they're still on that long streak of making the playoffs at 20 plus years. 10 guys in that same in that Olympics for them. So, and also some of the injuries during that tournament. Steven Stamkos, Mikko Koivu, and Henrik Sedin were all injuries prior to the tournament. But John Tavares, his team was already out of the playoffs at the Olympic break. They did not end up going on a run. Actually, New York's record post-Olympic break was actually better. Their pre-Olympic break record was points percentage was at a 433. Their post-Olympic break record points percentage was at a 614, actually. Funny enough to think. Henrik Zetterberg, we mentioned him for 2010. He also was dealing with another injury in 2014, a herniated disc. Played in the preliminary round after not playing at all in 2010 and missed the rest of the tournament and did not play in the gold medal game against Canada and only played in 2 playoff games against the Boston Bruins in the 2014 playoffs. Teemu Selanne, in his very last year in the NHL, at age 43, in the opening game, got injured against Austria, and then still played 12 playoff games right before they lost against the Los Angeles Kings there. And Alexei Emelin for the Montreal Canadiens, upper body injury in the prelims, missed some time, but he still ended up playing 15 playoff games before they ended up losing to the New York Rangers. But again, history shows that teams who are a lot closer, who are more in range, like we saw with Columbus in 2014 and for Detroit in 2010, it's more likely then, which means chances are very low for the Florida Panthers here. But coming up in segment number 2, we're going to discuss who has the most to prove coming out of the Olympic break for the Florida Panthers as they are back in action tonight against the Toronto Maple Leafs. We'll discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into a reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost for any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for 2. That's right. Flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about which teams can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock it in. I love features this time of year, whether it's picking a team to win the championship or grab a conference title. It adds an extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now not only can your picks cash, it can also send you to the finals. Visit FanDuel.com to get started and use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Segment number 2 here on this Thursday, February 26th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And listen, I'm I'm not here to provide you to I'm not here to try to create a little bit of false hope for the Panthers and their chances. I know that this is a team that is going to try to make the postseason because they are just wired that way. And you know what? I actually applaud the group for giving their all. It's just I feel that it's going to be a lot to overcome based on just the overall mileage that they've accumulated here. But again, I will, if they end up in that 11 to 14 range in the draft, even then, the fact that they go on a little bit of a run post Olympic break, that could create some good fortune and and it's, once again, it's great for the culture. And once again, when you originally traded that pick to the Chicago Blackhawks and you saw that they won a Stanley Cup, they won the trade regardless of what happens. But let's not forget that if the pick does end up in the top 10, treat it as icing on the cake. That's how I'm going to approach this for the rest of the regular season. But let's talk about guys who possibly have the most to prove coming in. And some of them I'll talk about what their futures look like as far as their age, as far as how they fit, as far as trying to extend the Panthers window. And I'm just thinking, and also I'm thinking about some guys who have helped the Panthers get to the mountaintop, and also is their game going to still be intact? Because, like, going back to what we said yesterday, Bill Zito even said it himself that he's got to make some uncomfortable decisions here. And one decision that I think is very obvious that the Panthers should already do, because this guy's not in the lineup, is trade Jesper Boquist. That is one guy that it doesn't matter about even the record for Jesper Boquist. It's the fact that if you look at puckpedia.com, the Panthers are over the cap, and they have guys like Nosek coming back, Dmitry Kulikov. They're already going to have to waive one of their extra defensemen in either Tobias Bjornfot or Donovan Zabrango, which I believe it's more likely going to be Zabrango. They're likely going to be going a forward short as well, which it's either trade Jesper Boquist or send one of the waivers exempt guys down, which is the two guys are Sandis Vilmanis and Mackie Samoskevich. I don't think you could send Vilmanis down right now, but based on how he's playing, he's helping this Florida Panthers team as far as especially their fourth line, bring the physicality, being in the right places, hunting for pucks, which I'm applauding for where Sandis Vilmanis' game is right now. But I'm just looking at guys like Mackie, because the shooting percentage is down. He's getting more puck touches. He's driving more off the wing. It's just whenever it comes to his size, he's getting beat. That's just what's happening as a guy who hasn't really matured into his body. And the fact is that he's also a piece that you could use for a future trade. I think that if you were going to trade Mackie Samoskevich, I think it's going to be during the offseason. I don't think it's going to be during this trade deadline, because you want to still at least see what you got. And the fact that his value is not really high right now, that is one player that I don't think should be moved right now for the Panthers, because you never know if he finishes strong. And the fact is that if the Panthers want to buy a little bit for guys to fit under the cap, as far as guys who have term, you're not in a position to do that to begin with, unless you season end LTIR Alexander Barkov, which, once again, Bill Zito has closed that door. So those are his words, not mine. But so that for Mackie, he has a lot to prove here. One of the extra defensemen, Tobias Bjornfot and or Donovan Zabrango, which I saw during line rushes on Twitter that it was just one of those two rotating between the last pair of them and Jeff Petrie there. So we don't know who's exactly going to be in the lineup tonight as of 11:29 a.m. here on the East Coast, but we'll see what happens there. But one of those guys also has a little bit to prove, because when Kulikov and then Jones come back, when Kulikov comes back, it looks like he's going to be the first. They're going to be the seventh defenseman. But what kind of impression can you leave in practice as well as in game action in the case that someone else does go down before Jones is back, which You're going to have to do some cap gymnastics when Jones comes back as well, because only 3.8 million of relief is coming off of his deal with LTIR. So it's likely going to be both that are going to be gone, Zabrango and Bjornfoot. I only say, I don't take this with a grain of salt when I say this, when it comes to performance, but Sergei Bobrovsky, are the Panthers really that serious in trying to trade him? I don't. I still think you need to honor the man, and if he does not want to go, you should treat it as if he does have a no move clause. But the performance and I think it's more of environment than it does have to do with him. Yeah, there's that run of less than 900 save percentage for him, but at the same time, you need to show that you can bail your team out when your team needs you there. So I do think that Bobrovsky has a little to prove, but not a lot to prove, because we see that when the environment is a lot better and that the goaltender can see shots, and the fact that there's a lack of breakaway opportunities, Bobrovsky can be just fine in situations. So, but can you be Superman with this break that he's had as well? And the last one, again, I believe this is totally environmentally based on where he was in the Olympics. Sam Reinhart. Sam Reinhart, 5 goals in clinching games in his last 2 Stanley Cup Finals in the clinchers, was not utilized properly for Team Canada, in my opinion. Which, you look at that Canada power play: McKinnon, McDavid, Crosby before he got hurt, Makar. Those, with the exception of really Crosby, the other 3 guys are more speed guys with a mix of hockey IQ, which Sidney Crosby and Sam Reinhart are more focused on their hockey IQ. Crosby is more of a guy who you're relying on the key draws on the power play, especially, which Sam Reinhart doesn't play center anymore. He hasn't really played center even with Barkov out. So I'm kind of surprised that he hasn't been shifted back often there. Although they do take faceoffs, he does take faceoffs on the right side of the ice whenever they are asked. But the fact that he wasn't utilized properly, the fact that he didn't get a lot of minutes, this is that moment where it's like a reminder: hey, don't forget who I am. That net front presence on the power play, which, again, a great power play goal that he had against Finland in the semifinal. But we know what Sam Reinhart's worth is. Maybe the national team doesn't really get that as much for Team Canada. So that it's another way of trying to prove yourself that, hey, with how they utilize them and them coming short, they might look at him as maybe as an afterthought in 2030. He's still going to be in the great age to still be on the team. He's not going to be past his prime. Marchand, that was probably his last chance in the most recent Olympics. Sam Bennett, costly penalty that almost cost Canada in regulation right before Jack Hughes went to the box himself. But those are other guys there. And here's the thing: the Panthers, right at the deadline or post deadline, they're gonna have to create wiggle room in order to bring Jones back, and they're gonna have to go down to 21 to 22 players as well. So it's not also about proving, but it's also about what are you going to look like when you don't have that many reinforcements there, assuming that everybody is healthy, because you're only going to have one forward, and you're going to have one forward as an extra, or even one defense, and you're going to be down a guy instead of your normal 3 scratches. You're going to have 2. So that is where, and that is why, going back to the first segment, that I really truly think it's unlikely that the Panthers go on a miraculous run. Plus, yeah, you're going to play a lot of teams that are ahead of you, but you also got to rely on them to lose on the games that you do, on the games that you don't play head to head. And the Panthers haven't really found a way to get 2 points while the opposition gets 0, or whenever the Panthers do lose, they haven't found a way to force overtime, which this is a team that has still played the least amount of overtime games. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to discuss maybe a scheduling disadvantage that the Panthers might have coming out of the Olympic break based on who their opponents are and where the fact that they've already played a game here. So we're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. And workplace chaos, deadline stacking up, and inbox overflowing, and the one position you have still open has yet to fill. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs help you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, and location. So you're not just hoping for the right candidate stumbles across your post. And there's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching for interviewing candidates who check all the boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all the boxes. Less stress, less time, and more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your posts the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire. This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Third and final segment here on this Thursday, February 26th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And make sure you join our Everyday Club. You'll get an ad-free audio edition of the show and access to the group chat on Discord and more. Use code DEADLINE ahead of the trade deadline for 1 month free, and join now or click the link in the show notes to learn more. So let's talk about where the Panthers once again are at here and the fact that they have 2 games right off the bat here with coming out of this Olympic break, which it's also great to see Matthew Tkachuk back. Their first power play unit is all Olympians, including 4 of them being part of the gold medal game, which it's going to be a power play unit of Marchand, Bennett, Reinhart, Tkachuk, and Uvis Belinskis running it at the point. Matthew Tkachuk was seen at the Elbow Room yesterday, partying with fans, just like he did post Stanley Cup. So made his return from the State of the Union and then continued the party going. I don't think he's put on any skates whatsoever since playing in that gold medal game. I highly, highly doubt it. But, the mode has got to change for Matthew Tkachuk, and also the mode has to change for the other guys on the roster. Obviously, Belinskis had a tournament that ended early. There's still that sour taste in the mouth from Marchand, Reinhart, and Bennett coming out of the Olympics. So definitely is a motivator for them to get back and just to get some wins here. And I'm questioning whether it's I question whether this schedule coming out of the Olympic break is really for the Panthers a little bit of a disadvantage, because again, there's still a lot for the Panthers to get through as far as road trips, because they still have not been to Western Canada yet, which they will go starting on March 15th. Seattle, Vancouver, Edmonton, and Calgary there for that trip in just 2 weeks. They will hit up the Northeast twice, including 2 trips to Long Island, and then 1 to New York and New Jersey, separated. And then you're going to see some teams twice here in this whole week, and 2 teams that are one of them being teams that you're chasing in the Columbus Blue Jackets, who currently are the first team out in the wild card. But the fact that Toronto has already played a game, they played last night against Tampa, and that game was not even close, which a great setup from Nikita Kucherov to Gage Gonzalez for a nice little breakaway goal on Anthony Stolarz. And is Jake Gensel dealing with a little bit of a gold medal hangover as he missed an empty net, and then Toronto ended up scoring on the power play. but that ended up not mattering because it was a multi-goal deficit for Toronto there. So that ended up not biting the Tampa Bay Lightning in the butt there. But right out of the Olympic break, the Buffalo Sabres were back in action on Wednesday, and they'll have the day off right before going to Florida, which funny, Tage Thompson and the Buffalo Sabres stayed hot. They got a win against Jack Hughes and the New Jersey Devils on Wednesday, which they addressed the crowd. They had the ceremonial puck drop with the two winners, and Jack Hughes had that turnover that it ended up in Tage Thompson's stick. It felt he looked surprised when he got that puck, and then ended up setting up Peyton Krebs for the goal. And one team that has not, because they're so comfortable in their position, and a lot of it has to do with the amount of overtime games they played in Vegas, and you kind of wish that was on the shoe of the Florida Panthers. 14 overtime losses for Vegas, by the way. And they didn't have any of their Olympians from Canada nor the USA, and they found a way to come back. They were down by as much as 3 goals and came back. So, and I know LA is missing Kevin Fiala, and there was the debut of Artemi Panarin, which he got multiple assists on the night in his debut out in Southern California. But it's go time for the Panthers. It's no time to waste. But the fact that I spoke about in segment number 1 how the teams who have had the most Olympians in 2010 and in 2014 didn't lose a beat. So even though the Panthers find themselves outside of the playoff race, and that momentum is still going with the multiple Panthers who have played, this actually could be an advantage for the Panthers. Maybe. But again, the rest of the group and the fact that Toronto played last night, although they looked poor, maybe the fact that they played an actual game, which even the gold medalists, which are 4 for the Panthers, they have 1, 2, 3 days off, and it doesn't help that Matthew went from Milan, Miami, DC, back to South Florida. So we'll see. Which Team USA also said, Matthew Tkachuk during his media availability this morning said that Team USA is going to have a little bit of a reunion this summer, which he also said Chris Chelios offered up his beach house, which that's pretty cool. Not going to lie. But we'll see how the Panthers fare, because Buffalo's legit. Toronto's already played. And the fact that it's a majority of it being outside of South Florida for their games, which we've seen the Panthers play at their best outside of South Florida over these last few years, especially in the playoffs, which a 90% plus penalty kills during the playoffs. And their penalty kill is still great, even this year in what's looking like a lost year, which that's exciting when you think of Nosek and Kulikov possibly returning. It's just you hope their power play gets back to a place where right now they're 19th in the NHL. You hope that at least before Jones comes back, which it looks a lot closer than we think. We just hope to see that it could at least gain the blue line a little bit better, protecting it when they are in the ozone. Those wall battles, which we see that Alexander Barkov sorely missed when it comes to, even if it's not a battle, just the anticipation of flipping it back from the half wall to the corner, so that even if the defense for the penalty kill for the opposing team is above the goal line, that quick decision from the half wall to the end boards, by the time that defender draws, Matthew Tkachuk with his hockey IQ behind the net could create a setup, and it creates an open opportunity in the bumper for someone like Sam Reinhart that we've seen over and over again. So that's what I'm hoping improves on the power play. And hopefully that starts tonight, which the Panthers have lost both games against Toronto this year. And the fact that there's 2 more matchups here for the Panthers, you at least want to show the Leafs that you're still not going to go away. But again, one game at a time. And like we said in our most recent episode, it's a sprint to the deadline, because that is going to decide, that is going to dictate the direction which this front office goes. So no time to waste. And the flip, like Matthew Tkachuk says, has to switch. But thank you guys, as always, for listening to today's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. On Friday's edition of the show, we will be breaking down the Panthers game between them and the Toronto Maple Leafs, and then preview Friday's game against the Buffalo Sabres. Thank you, as always, for listening. And in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.